The audition room at the Deutsche Oper Berlin fell silent. It was September 2019, and the afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors where countless opera legends had once stood. At the grand piano sat an accompanist who had played for Placido Domingo, René Fleming, and Jonas Coffin. Behind a long table sat a panel of 5 judges, but only one truly mattered: Maestro Klaus Steinberg, the 72-year-old artistic director whose opinion could launch or destroy careers with a single word. Klaus had dedicated 50 years of his life to opera. He had conducted in Vienna, Milan, New York, and London. He had trained at the finest conservatories, studied under masters whose names appeared in textbooks, and maintained standards that many considered inflexible, but he considered essential. Opera, to Klaus, was not entertainment, it was art in its purest form, requiring years of technical training, cultural refinement, and an understanding of European classical tradition that could not be faked or improvised. The woman standing nervously at the center of the room represented everything Klaus believed did not belong in his opera house. Her name was Maria Santos, a 32-year-old Filipino who worked as a live-in caregiver for an elderly German couple in Berlin. She wore a simple black dress she had borrowed from a friend, her hair pulled back in a modest bun, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking. She had no conservatory training, no prestigious teachers, no performance resume that would impress anyone at this level. What she did have was a voice that had been singing since childhood in church choirs in Laguna Province, at family gatherings where OPM ballads filled small living rooms, at karaoke bars where she earned extra money during college. Her vocal technique came not from formal instruction, but from kundiman, the traditional Filipino art song characterized by emotional depth, control, vibrato, and a storytelling quality that prioritized feeling over perfect pitch. Klaus glanced at Maria's application form with barely concealed skepticism. No formal training, he asked in accented English, his tone making it clear this was not actually a question, but a statement of disqualification. "No, Maestro," Maria replied softly, her Filipino accent evident. "I learned from my Lola, my grandmother, and from singing in church. But I've loved opera my whole life. I've listened to recordings of Pavarotti, Callas, Carreras." Klaus waved his hand dismissively. Listening is not the same as understanding. Opera requires years of technical development, breath control, diction, musical theory, cultural context. He looked at his fellow judges, who nodded in agreement. "What aria have you prepared?" "Nessun Dorma." "Maestro," from Transit. Several judges exchanged glances. Nessun Dorma was one of opera's most iconic and demanding tenor arias, though occasionally performed by sopranos in different keys. It required power, control, and emotional nuance. It was also the piece that separated true opera singers from enthusiastic amateurs. Klaus leaned back in his chair. "This is a waste of everyone's time." "But very well, proceed." The pianist began the introduction. Maria closed her eyes, and for a moment, she was no longer in Berlin. She was back in her Lola's small house in Laguna, listening to her grandmother sing much of Eng Passage while cooking dinner, teaching her that every note should carry a story. Every phrase should make someone feel something real. She remembered her Lola saying, "Huwag kang kumanta para sa tingalang. Kumanta ka para sa puso." Don't sing just for the ears. Sing for the heart. Maria began to sing. Her first notes were not what Klaus expected. They weren't the polished, conservatory perfect tones he was used to hearing. There was a rawness to them, an emotional vulnerability that felt almost intimate for the formal setting. Her pronunciation of the Italian lyrics was accented, not quite perfect. Her vibrato didn't follow the strict European classical standard. It had hints of Kundemann's characteristic wavering that emphasized emotion over technical precision. Klaus frowned, already forming his critique. This was exactly what he feared, and trained enthusiasm masquerading as artistry. He prepared to stop the audition after the first verse. But then something happened that he hadn't anticipated. As Maria moved into the second verse, her voice began to open up. The rawness transformed into power without losing its emotional core. She wasn't just hitting notes, she was telling a story. The aria, which speaks of hope in darkness, of waiting for dawn, of refusing to give up even when the night seems endless, poured out of her with a conviction that made it feel less like a performance and more like a confession. Klaus's hand, which had been raised to signal the pianist to stop, slowly lowered. He leaned forward slightly, his critical expression shifting to something closer to attention. The other judges noticed, the pianist noticed, even the assistant who had been taking notes looked. Up, pen frozen mid-stroke, Maria reached the famous climax. Vincero, vincero. I will win. I will triumph. But she didn't shout it the way many singers did, forcing volume to prove power. Instead, she sang it with absolute certainty, her voice soaring not through aggression, but through unwavering belief. The technique was imperfect by conservatory standards, but the emotion was undeniable. It was the sound of someone who had actually struggled, who had actually overcome, who knew what it meant to wait for dawn in genuine darkness. When the final note faded, Maria opened her eyes. The room was completely silent. She couldn't read the judges' faces. Klaus sat motionless, staring at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. Seconds passed like hours. Then Klaus spoke, his voice tight. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" Maria hesitated, unsure if this was criticism or curiosity. "From my Lola, Maestro. She taught me kundiman, our traditional Filipino love songs. She said every note should carry feeling. That technique without emotion is just noise." "Kundiman," Klaus repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "And you think this, straight singing, belongs in opera?" The word straight hung in the air like an insult. Maria felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger, but she kept her voice steady. "I think opera is about telling stories that move people, Maestro. My Lola couldn't read music, but she understood that. If that's street singing, then yes, I think it belongs wherever people need to feel something true." Klaus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The other judges looked alarmed, expecting him to dismiss her. Instead, he walked around the table and approached Maria directly. He stopped a few feet away, and for the first time, she saw that his eyes were wet. "I have been directing opera for 47 years, he said quietly. "I have heard thousands of singers. Perfect technique, prestigious training, flawless diction." His voice cracked slightly. "But I cannot remember the last time I felt what I just felt listening to you sing. You made me believe every word. That is not street singing. That is what opera is supposed to be." He turned to the other judges. "We are accepting her. Full scholarship. Principal training program." The judges looked stunned. One of them, the soprano who taught at the conservatory, spoke up carefully. "Klaus, with all respect, she has no formal training. The program requires." "I don't care what it requires," Klaus interrupted, his voice firm. "We will teach her technique. But what she has, this emotional truth, this ability to make you believe, that cannot be taught. It is either there or it isn't. And she has it." Maria stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Maestro, I have to work. I support my family in the Philippines. I can't afford "The opera house will employ you," Klaus said, "part-time administrative work, enough to support yourself and send money home. You will train mornings and evenings in 2 years. You will perform on this stage. That is my promise." What happened next became Berlin opera legend. Maria entered the training program in October 2019, and while her technical progress was sometimes slow, her breath control needed work. Her diction required constant correction. Her emotional performances during student recitals drew crowds. Word spread. A video of her singing "O My O Babino Caro" at a Christmas concert went viral, accumulating 15 million views in a week. Klaus, who had spent decades maintaining rigid standards, found himself questioning assumptions he had held for half a century. He began researching kundiman, discovering a rich vocal tradition that prioritized emotional storytelling over technical showmanship. He invited Filipino vocal coaches to conduct workshops at the conservatory, shocking colleagues who considered him a purist. In June 2021, Maria made her official debut at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, performing the role of Mimi in La Boheme. The house was sold out weeks in advance, not just with opera regulars, but with Filipino communities from across Germany who had never attended opera before. When Maria sang Mimi's final aria, a death scene requiring both technical control and heartbreaking vulnerability, the audience sat in absolute silence until the final note faded. Then they erupted. The standing ovation lasted 12 minutes. Klaus, conducting that night, turned to acknowledge Maria with tears streaming down his face as she took her vows. He walked to her and bowed deeply, a gesture of respect reserved for the greatest artists. The moment was captured on dozens of phones and went viral globally, reaching over 300 million views. Critics who had been skeptical before the performance wrote reviews that bordered on reverent. The Berliner Morgen called it the most emotionally devastating Mimi in a generation. The International Opera Review wrote, "Maria Santos proves that the future of opera lies not in perfect technique alone, but in the fusion of training and genuine human emotion. She represents a bridge between Western classical tradition and global vocal heritage." But perhaps the most meaningful review came from Klaus himself, in an essay he published in Opera magazine months later. "I spent my career believing that opera excellence required a specific path: European conservatories, Italian diction coaches, years of technical drilling. Then a Filipino caregiver with a borrowed dress and a grandmother's lessons taught me that I had confused gatekeeping with standard setting." Maria Santos didn't dilute opera. She reminded us what it's supposed to do: make us feel. The fact that she does this through a fusion of Puccini and kundiman doesn't make her less of an opera singer. It makes her a more complete artist. Maria continued to perform internationally, but she never forgot her roots. She established a foundation that provided opera training scholarships for Filipino and other Southeast Asian singers who lacked access to traditional conservatory systems. She commissioned new operas that incorporated Filipino musical elements, expanding the repertoire beyond European narratives. And she always credited her Lola, who passed away in 2020, but lived long enough to hear her granddaughter on Berlin Opera Radio. The lesson from that September audition echoes far beyond opera houses. It speaks to the danger of conflating tradition with exclusivity, of mistaking formal training for artistic truth. Klaus Steinberg learned that excellence can emerge from unexpected places, that a grandmother in Laguna province teaching kundiman to her granddaughter had preserved something European conservatories had lost: the understanding that technique serves emotion, not the other way around. Maria Santos proved that street and sophisticated are not opposites, that the ability to move hearts transcends institutional gatekeeping. She walked into a room where she was dismissed as unqualified and left having earned not just acceptance but reverence. That's the Filipino way, carrying centuries of cultural wisdom quietly, sharing it generously, and proving through action that excellence wears many faces and speaks many languages, including the lingua. Give the heart, which needs no translation,